Thank you, Kelly. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Artist Loft 101 drawing class. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and this is Mixed Media Perspective Drawing Part 4. So this is the final installment in this mini series on creating a mixed media perspective drawing. And you can find the previous classes from this series all on YouTube or on the Michaels website under Fine Art Classes. And yeah, last week we had a bit of technical difficulties and we were not able to have participants in the class, but hopefully you all found the part 3 class on YouTube. And I believe that was emailed to everybody who signed up, but it's there on YouTube and I've seen that a lot of folks have watched it. So anyway, moving on, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my tabletop view. So this is where we left off last week. Before I get started, I just wanted to remind you to tag your work with the hashtags MakeItWithMichaels or Michaels Classes, and follow me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. And if anybody's new to the classes tonight, here is some of my personal work on my business cards here. I always like to flash at the start of the class. And there's some of my other contact information, email, website, Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art on Facebook. I'm easy to find. Okay, so just to review the supplies that were on the supply list for the entire 4-part series here. We started with the Artist Loft sketching pencils to create a layout. We're using the Artist Loft watercolor paper, the 6x9 watercolor pad. We've got blue tape to tape down the watercolor paper. So tonight when we're done, we're going to peel that blue tape off and have a nice satisfying reveal of those margins that we taped if you did that along with me. So that was the first installment, was creating the layout. And then second class we added some pen and ink using the Artist Loft illustration pens. And then last week we created a palette using the Artist Loft watercolor pencils and paintbrushes. And then we began adding the watercolor pencils and watering that down, or creating more of a paint vibe using the paintbrushes and water. And then that's where we left off. So at the end of class number 3, I had added one layer to the sky, the background trees, and the grass, and that was about as far as I got. But we mixed up all of the colors and we tested them out so that we could see how those colors look when we add water to them. We talked about blending and building a nice even tone of each color so that the water has something to grab onto. And so you're creating this washy effect with those watercolor pencils and how to achieve that. And so that's the reason for creating the color swatch ahead of time, is to, one, test out how to blend the colors and how to combine the colors to get the desired color that you're looking for. And then also to see what's happening when you add water to it. You know, it's always good to do a test on separate paper so that, you know, all the time that we spent preparing this final draft, we can go into it knowing, with some knowledge about what's going to happen. And then the last thing on the supply list that we'll be using tonight to add some finishing touches to this mixed media piece is the gel pen, the white gel pen. So a lot of the glowy highlights and little nuances that were added here, I did with just a white gel pen. So that's what was on the supply list. But I created this class actually back in September, but you know, it's just now happening here in November. But I've done a little bit more shopping of the Artist Loft brand, and I keep discovering new things. It's very fun being a representative of Artist Loft. They make so much stuff that I didn't realize that they made, and I maybe could have updated the supply list with this, but there's an Artist Loft opaque marker that you could use to get a similar effect that I'm going to be using with the gel pen. So I might use both of those tonight, and maybe I'll do another class where I really showcase this opaque marker. Okay, so any questions about supplies before we get started adding another layer here?
Hey, Adrian, we don't have any questions on the products at the moment. We do have a question regarding mixing color for the palette.
Okay.
Is that okay to go over now?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so Lynette from St. Petersburg, she has having trouble color mixing for her palette. Colors on palette look good, but then look too dark or too light on the work. Trying to lighten or darken on the work has not worked at all. I would like tips for fixing color on the work. Can a regular watercolor be added?
Yeah, you can definitely add a regular watercolor on top of it to resolve anything like that. So yeah, to lighten things up, I mean, once you've put it down and it's dried, that it's, you know, difficult to lift watercolor back out of you know, a piece, but you can always, you know, add highlights. Maybe it'll lighten up when we add some highlights, or yeah, you could add another layer of lighter colors. Um, yeah, I'm not too sure what more to say about that. I mean, without getting too specific about what's happening with your specific piece, like what colors you're using, and you know, stuff like that. It's hard to troubleshoot something so specific for the whole class, but I think that should help if anybody else is having issues like that, adding another layer or adding some highlights to brighten things up. But definitely that's a good reason to test things out before you put it on the final paper. How it's looking on your test sheet is a good, you know, way to know how it's going to look on the final paper.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, any other questions jumping out right now about last week's class or previous classes before we move on?
No other questions. Just so everyone knows, I will be putting the links to the last classes in the chat for everyone to check out.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and just start adding another layer. So the biggest thing you want to keep in mind as you continue adding layers to this is just drying time. That's kind of at the forefront of my mind tonight, because we do have, you know, limited time for me to finish this and to hopefully get those finishing touches on here. So I need to make sure that where I'm adding the pen at the end of the class, you know, you can always add that later if yours isn't quite dry yet, but I need to make sure that where I plan to add the white gel pen is dry enough for me to add the white gel pen. Otherwise, I can't, I have to have a dry surface to add the gel pen. You can use a hair dryer to speed up the drying process of the watercolor. Another thing that maybe is happening to yours or may happen by the time you're done, I just want to mention this in case I don't have time to mention it at the end of the class, is your paper might buckle if you didn't tape it down, because I didn't tape down this original piece when I worked on it. And that's why I worked, you know, flush to the edge of the paper. But so when I was done, this was very, you know, had a lot of wrinkles and buckles in it. So the way to get rid of those buckles on watercolor paper is to just spritz the back of the paper with some water, with a water spray bottle, and then put it underneath a piece of plywood or masonite or just a stack of books, you know, just make sure you're not putting a book against the front of the paper that has, you know, any print or anything that's going to come off on the paper. And you want to make sure that the front of the paper is dry. So you're just spritzing the back of the paper, and then put it underneath a stack of books. And like I said, a piece of masonite or plywood works really well. Maybe not cardboard, because that might have some you know, texture that could press into it, but the weight of the books will flatten it out nice and straight for you. Okay, so just wanted to make sure I mentioned that for anybody who didn't tape down their paper, because it is going to get really wet and it's going to buckle. So I'm going to work on a second layer for the background here. I'm just going to dive in with those same colors that I used last week for the sky. So I used lavender and dark blue on the sky. So I want a nice even layer of the watercolor pencil. That's the thing that I mentioned the most last week. So I'm using the side of the pencil, and I'm really getting a nice even tone of each color that I'm putting down, so that when I add the water, it has something to grab onto. And I wanted my sky to really have a lot of purple, and last week that dark blue dominated. So I'm gonna try to make the purple nice and thick, but you want to avoid pressing down with the top of the pencil too much, unless you're trying to get like a nice clean line. But if you're trying to create an entire area of that color, then using the side of the pencil will help you achieve a really nice soft tone of that color. So last week I added the lavender and the dark blue before I added the water with the paintbrush, but this week I'm just on the second layer. I'm just gonna use just the lavender because I really wanted that violet color to stick out for the sky. So the biggest mistake that I see people, not necessarily mistake, but just pitfall that a lot of people struggle with when using watercolor pencils or watercolor period, is not using enough water, or with the watercolor pencils, not using enough color, not putting down enough color. And so if you're just coloring a really thin layer of your watercolor pencil, and then you go to spread that out with water, if the water doesn't have much to grab onto, then it's gonna just, you know, make a really thin color. And then it always looks different when it dries versus when it's wet. So so yeah, and then maybe the person who was saying that it was getting a little too dark, maybe you're adding, that could be happening if there's a little too much of the color, or we're being really heavy-handed with the way you're adding it. So I'm using the round brush to begin to blend that next layer that I just added on the sky. Excuse me, I just dropped my paper towel here. So you also want your paper towel, and if I didn't say the Artist Loft paintbrushes, I just realized I didn't mention those when I was going over supplies. So tonight we need watercolor pencils, the paintbrushes, water cup, all that was on the supply list though. So so I'm just loading up my brush with water and then quickly filling in that whole area. And you really just want to touch the area where you're blending with the water, and then let the water kind of puddle and pool. You know, really avoid brushing over that same area too much, because you can easily overblend or go into an area that you're not trying to add that color to. And if you do that, then the purple could easily go too much into the trees or the lavender. So I'm just kind of touching all of the areas where I just added that lavender and I'm re-wetting my paintbrush a lot so that I've got a nice little puddle of water happening everywhere, and then letting that just sort of blend on its own. Because when it dries, you'll get these really fun little, this bleed to happen. And I'm a big fan of those bleed lines. I know some people are not. And if you're not a fan of the bleed lines, then you can kind of go back in and blend or dry out that area a little bit and then do it again. The more layers you add, the more that line will blend and go away. But you can definitely overblend if you do that too much. And the way that you know that you have overblended your watercolor pencils is the paper will really buckle a lot, and maybe the paper will start to pill, is what I call it. Like you'll get little bits and pieces of the paper are like coming off of the paper, and that is your cue to pause and stop, take a break, let that dry. If you keep doing that when the paper starts to do that, you could end up with a hole in your paper, which is, with watercolor paper, that's less likely to happen, or mixed media. It depends on the weight of the paper that, so when you look at the watercolor pad, it's gonna say the weight of the paper, and the Artist Loft watercolor pad here is 140-pound paper, which is pretty good, and that's what you want, so that it can handle a few different layers of water. But if you're working with the mixed media paper, for example, instead of the watercolor pencil, that one's not going to be able to handle as much water weight. Okay, so while that's drying, I'm going to add another layer to my grass and my trees. So on the trees, I was using the dark green the emerald green and the black. I did add some dark green in there, and you can add whatever colors you want. Yours don't have to be exactly like my colors. If you wanted your trees to be even darker, or more green, if you wanted it to look more like a daytime scene and not dusk like mine. And I'm just filling in this area of the trees. The other thing I mentioned last week is you can use a little bit of that hatching technique around the edge of the tree to create a texture there at the edge. We can also go back in when this is dry and add our pen back on top of it if you wanted it to be darker. Or we can use the black watercolor pencil to darken things up as well. And maybe you like how it looks with just one layer. You don't necessarily have to put multiple layers on things like I'm doing. I'm just a big fan of layers. And so I like things to feel nice and full and rich with color. And that can usually only be achieved by letting things dry and then doing another layer. So if you're not satisfied with a layer of color that you put on, let it dry before you do another layer. That's kind of the main takeaway that I want you to get about the watercolor pencils is if you're running into an issue that you're not satisfied with, try not to fix it while everything is still wet. Let it dry and see what you think when it's dry, because it just looks so much different. Like that sky right now is still wet, and maybe I'm not satisfied with that right now, but I can't really know if I'm satisfied or not until I let it dry and then revisit it. And if you're just curious about what happens when you use the watercolors, put down the water first and then add the watercolors on top of it, I found that I actually do like what happens when I do that. So I'm just gonna demonstrate that a little bit on the sky with that lavender, since it's all still wet. It feels a little funny, like it feels like the pencil starts to feel a little waxy in those moments where, oh well, I'll just demonstrate it. So if I take the lavender where the sky is still wet, in some parts it doesn't really want to accept it, but if I kind of let it, oops, put a little too much. If I let the water pool right there and then touch it with the pencil, the dry pencil, it does really take it, but it only takes it like that if you touch the watercolor pencil to a puddle of water. So, you know, use that at your discretion if you like the way that looks. If you don't like the way that looks or feels adding it that way, then don't do it. But I just wanted to mention that is an option, is to put the water down first, but it can't be like semi-dry. You really want a puddle of it there. But that's a fun way to get things to be a little darker and fuller and richer with that color. And I might do that again while that's wet with the dark blue, just to give that color a little bit more of a dynamic. So yeah, you can really see it with the blue for some reason. The blue is really bleeding nicely into that puddle. So there can be a mix of dry on wet and then wet on dry, which is a term I guess you can only use with watercolor pencils. Normally wet on wet is what you do with regular watercolor. So you'll put a layer of water down and then add your wet watercolor on top of that. So that's making the blue kind of overtake the sky a little bit here. I really wanted mine to be more lavender, so I'm going to go back in again with the purple and just kind of touch that area and see now it's really starting to have the effect that I was hoping for. It's giving the sky just a deeper, some depth, you know, it's pushing the sky back, it's making it feel nice and full. So yeah, and maybe you like the way it looks really thin. Maybe you don't want to add all these extra layers. And what happened, you know, with your first pass on the watercolor on the sky is satisfying enough to you, then you can also just leave it alone. But that's another reason to test things out on your test paper as well, to see if you even like that effect. I just had a quality, and then whenever I touched it with the water, it spread and bled much differently. So I'm going to leave it alone for a minute and let that dry. It's getting a little too wet. Okay, but there's a good example of what happens if you go too hard. Because now I'm like, I feel like I almost want to take my paper towel and grab some of that out of there. I think I'm going to, and then let that dry and then do that again. So just to demonstrate, you know, if you go a little overboard, it's okay to grab it back out. You just got to grab it back out while it's still pretty wet. If you try to make amendments once it's dry, it's a little trickier. Okay, so let me add another layer to this ground on the grass. So it's using the emerald green, the gray, and also the yellow green. I think I just didn't write it on here, but I also had the yellow green in this grass color. And I think I added the yellow green on this other example towards the, you know, when I was almost done with this, I realized I wanted the grass to be lighter. So I added a bunch of this yellow green. So I'm leaving it kind of lighter in the middle and doing a bit of a vignette on on the grass here. So I'm using the emerald green and the black around the edges of the grass, the edges of the picture frame here, to create a shadow near the house and under that picnic bench. And I'm using a diagonal hatching line as I build up this color. I need to sharpen this one just a little bit. I'm using a diagonal hatching line so that this grass feels connected, and since the shadow is falling in a diagonal, it just made sense to make this entire area depict it using diagonal lines. You could always fill it in horizontally or vertically, but that's going to give it a different sense of depth. And but it's all, as long as you're using the same directional lines the entire time, then it's all going to feel connected. So I want a nice even tonal layer. Unlike certain mediums, when you re-wet that area, like when I'm added water to the sky, what I'm blending is the last layer that I put on. If I were to just add water to what's already dry, I mean, it will blend some, but you want to get another nice even layer going. So really covering the entire area that I want to blend. And I'm leaving kind of some space. I'm going to the edge of the fence line here, but I'm leaving a little bit of space. And last week I talked about why you want to work from the background forward, and just use the fence as an example. If I were to add the color to that fence first, the fence is in front of the grass, right? If I added the color to the fence first and then tried to blend another layer of the grass, it's very likely that I'm going to touch the fence line, and the watercolor layers, if they haven't blended already, could start to blend again. And then I would have the the browns in the fence line, and the black and everything in the fence line would start to bleed into the grass, and I don't want that. Same thing with the trees. If I were to do the trees first and then try to go in and add that purple, it's very likely that the green from the trees would bleed into my sky, and then things can get kind of muddied and murky really quickly like that. So the best way to avoid that is just to work from the background forward. Got a pretty nice layer of my emerald green here in diagonal directional lines. And I'm going to add my black again on top of that. And I realized I haven't shown my reference photo yet. I got a little spot of water on my reference photo somehow, so I'm just gonna try not to show that part of it. But the grass gets pretty dark in the front. There is a little bit of a vignette happening on it, so I'm gonna do more of that by adding this hazy ness of black all the way around. And then once I've got a nice even layer of the colors that I'm blending together, then I'll add the water. So last week I also talked about why you want to blend your colors with the watercolor pencils before you add the water to them, and that's just, like I said, so that the water has a lot to grab onto and all that blending can happen with minimal brush strokes so that you're not having to go over that area with the paintbrush over and over again. So now I'm adding the yellow green on top of that and really concentrating the yellow green to the middle. I'm gonna go right up to the edge of the fence now and get more of a clean line to happen with the yellow green, because I want that yellow green to really dominate in the middle here. Try to keep my directional lines diagonal, but I am going a few different directions here just to fill in near the edge of the fence line. Are there any questions popping up worth mentioning, Kelly?
No questions right now.
Okay. Kind of covered up my little fence posts there a little bit, so I'm gonna redefine those a little bit. Okay, so yeah, you can see that it already feels nice and rich with the watercolor pencils. I'm doing most of the blending work with the pencils, and this is just like when we're shading with graphite and we're using the tortillions or the blending stumps. I've talked about how with tonal shading with graphite, how if you blend a little too soon with the tortillions, you're kind of just smearing around the marks that you have made. But if you make your blending happen with your graphite and you're putting all the hard work in with the pencils themselves, then the tortillions blend in a softer way, or in a way that I think is more desirable effect is achieved. So same thing here. We've done most of the blending with the pencils. So now all I've got to do is just touch it with my paintbrush full of water, and it should give me that nice bleed that I'm looking for. So I'm going to use this this brush with the diagonal shape, and I'm going to keep my brush strokes diagonal again, and I'm going to stick to the outer areas first so that that black doesn't bleed too much into the middle where I want it to stay light. I'm going right up against the edge of my blue tape so that that color is nice and rich right up to the edge. And when I do that tape peel at the end, I'll get a nice, oh my gosh, it's already 34 minutes in here. I better hurry it up if I'm going to do that satisfying tape peel for you guys. Okay, and then work my way into the middle so that way the darker grass stays at the edge. You can clean your brush and dab it on the paper towel so that the darker colors don't bleed too much into the middle. And being careful not to paint over my fence too much. And keep my brush strokes diagonal. A lot of moving parts here. I'm just touching it with the water, and it's all puddling and pooling and blending together nicely. And I'm gonna leave that alone. I'm not gonna mess with it like I did the sky. I just wanted to show you guys what would happen if you went in direct on top of a wet area, because I know people are curious about what would happen if you did it that way. I switched to my little round brush to fill in some of these keyhole moments and to just blend that area again. Maintain that diagonal brush stroke. So I think that looks pretty good for the grass. I might want to go back in and add another layer, but I'm not going to because I want to work on the house and the lights and everything now and still have time to reveal that tape. But I do need to add my color to the trees, or the water to the trees again now. But I didn't want to do that too soon because that sky was still wet. And since I did put so many layers already up here, there is a little bit of bleeding between the trees and the sky happening. So maybe I rushed that area a little too much on the last pass, but that's okay. If I let that dry completely, I can probably see a way to correct that. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to work on is the house. And the house was light blue and gray, and then also gray. And then this combination of colors. So light blue, ivory, lavender, and gray. And then the lights were these colors: white, ivory, dark pink, golden yellow, and dark brown. And I know that seems like a lot, but we want to do work from background forward. So we're going to do the house and then the lights. So the first thing I'm going to use is my gray on the house, light blue and gray. I'm going to follow the directional flow of the lines on the house. So I'm following the orthogonal path of my perspective lines, my hatching lines that I added on the house here. So I'm using darker gray near the top and the bottom of the house, and then around the lights is where I want to put more of that ivory, lavender, and light blue, because I want it to be lighter around the lights. So we've got to create this glowing effect now. Try not to touch the white siding of the house too much so that I can keep that nice and light and add that ivory color to that. So just, take note of everywhere on the house where you want it to glow, where you want that light to show up, and then you'll just, try to leave that blank paper for now. The other house is also gray. Uh-oh, I got some of my green is bleeding right there onto my house. So I'm just gonna leave that alone. Try to go right up next to that wet spot. And anywhere it gets super dark, you can use your black watercolor, or you can wait for it to dry and put the black pen back on top of that. Oh geez, it happened again. Just gonna pull it out with my paper towel. It's got really wet right there. So I'm also drying my watercolor pencil on my paper towel because my watercolor got wet when that happened, and then that's going to make it hard for the pigment to come off of it when it's wet. It really only wants to come off if you've got like that puddle of water. So it kind of resists a little bit when you try to do it direct on just a little bit of wet paper, or when something like that happens. Okay, and then I'm going to add a layer of my light blue on top of that gray. I'm going to go ahead and do my light blue and my gray, but just use less pressure on it, a little closer to the lights. So I'm leaving some blank space around the lights. I'm just getting in there in those little spaces near the lights with the blue. And I'm being lighter with my pressure there. And I'm using a little bit more heavy pressure in the places on the house where I want it to be darker. Be mindful of that weird wet spot right there where the tree started bleeding. I don't want that to spread too much more. And if you're running into these things, you can just wait for those things to dry. I'm having to power through past weird wet moments like that because I want to get you guys a finished product here before the end of the hour. But like where this bleeding is happening, if I were just working by myself on this right now and that were happening, I would just take a break and let it dry and then go in and put this layer on the house. There's no reason to force anything like I'm doing right now, but I am forcing it a little bit. So I'm just trying not to touch those areas where it's wet so that my colors don't bleed too much. I'm switching the position of my hand a lot so that I can change the direction of my shading so that it can match the perspective. If I were to shade in all different directions, it might create a confusing set of lines that are contradictory to all that hard work we put into the perspective lines. Okay, so in the lighter areas near the glowy lights, we want more ivory and a little bit of lavender, a little bit of that sky color coming in. So where's my ivory? It looks like this. It's the peachy color. I'm just going to sharpen it so that it's a lot of it is exposed because we're going to use a lot of that color. That is definitely the key ingredient to this glowy light effect. It's the white and the ivory. Let's go ahead and just put a layer of white everywhere where this ivory is going. You can also kind of create a little bit of a resist to other colors by putting that white down. So on the trim of the house, doing that, you can go ahead and color some white in the center of the lights before anything gets too wet near the lights. You know, just make sure that I've got a nice solid white inside of all of these lights. If it's not popping and standing out super white, that's where the gel pen can really help us, or that opaque Artist Loft marker, if you happen to have one of those. This is one of those things, if I had done this, I don't know what I was trying to say. Oh, if you hadn't erased your pencil lines right here, there's a few of these where I didn't quite erase my pencil lines. So let me do that because the gray graphite is mixing with the white and it's not giving me, oh dear, I just somehow got a spot of green in there. So yeah, if you didn't erase your pencil lines on where your lights were, now's a good time to do that because we want this to be as bright white in the middle of these lights as possible. And you could even go outside of the lights and do a nice circle around them because we really want this area to glow. I'm doing a little bit of white on this fence as well. Did some horizontal lines, and then mostly I'm doing some vertical lines right here on the fence with the white. And then now the ivory. So I'm going to do the trim of the house. Start to put that ivory on the house itself. So when you want something to glow white, it's all about what you put around the white to make that contrast happen. Because the blank paper or the white watercolor pencil can only glow so much, right? It's an optical illusion that we're creating here. So we want this ivory color is signaling to our audience or whoever looks at our artwork that the light that's coming off of those lights is creating this warm ivory color on everything. So when that layer of tree is dry, I could even add some more ivory to the trees. I did that last week a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little circle of ivory or a little half circle around all of my bulbs, my light bulbs. So that area where we left it kind of blank when we used the pen, that was a good thing to do so that I can create this ivory glow around those. You don't necessarily have to put a full circle around all of them, just a little half circle, crescent shape around them all will do just fine. I used this analogy last week. I use this analogy a lot when I'm talking about pen. Maybe it was the week before. But when you're trimming your hair or your bangs, I cut my bangs a lot, and it's like I've learned over time to just do it slowly, like just trim a little bit at a time, because I can always trim a little bit more, but I can never put it back. I just have to wait a few weeks for my bangs to grow back if I trim too much. So it's like that when you're using darker colors. It's better to use your lighter colors first, to just do a little bit at a time. You can always add more, but it's difficult to take it away. Okay, and then the fence is also glowing, but everything's a little too wet near my fence right now. Maybe not right here, but I want that ivory color on the fence too. Well, I've got that color in my hand. Thought I'd go ahead and put it everywhere, but the fence is still a little too wet. These windows, edges have that glow on them as well. And the siding right here. I'm really struggling, you guys, with all these wet spots I've created. Okay, that's good enough. Okay, and then I want my pink in this glowy area. A little bit of pink in those little crescents. Like a little bit of an afterglow of pink happening. And if you're putting this on and you're like, oh, that pink looks amazing, and so you want to put more pink, just keep in mind the whole, you can always add more later. If you go overboard with something, like sometimes an accent color like this looks great as an accent color, but if you were to let it dominate everything, then it will do just that. It will dominate everything. So let it just be an accent color. And I've learned that the hard way. So let all of my years of trial and error, boost you here. Okay. So I'm just doing a little bit of that pink all the way around, but just little accents here and there. I'm going to put a little bit of that pink on the fence. And then I wanted to put a little bit of my lavender color. Oh my goodness, so the green is stuck to my lavender. That's what's happening. There's some green on my lavender pencil. Well, geez. If I were to put water on that, then that whole area would be wet. So I'm just gonna power through, pretend I didn't just put green right there. So I'm just adding a little bit of lavender to the house just because I felt like since it's in the sky, maybe it would be reflected a little bit. Now the water will reflect whatever color the sky is. Houses, skin tones, lots of things will reflect the color of the environment around them. So since I put that lavender in the sky, it made sense to put some of it on the house as well. Okay, and now I'm going to take my small rounded brush and I'm going to do the lights first. Just since I want them to, I'm afraid if I do the house first, if I blend the color around the house first, it might bleed into the lights, and I want the lights to bleed into the house. So even though I'm kind of contradicting myself here about working background forward, but really just because I want the lights to bleed over onto the house. I want that glow to bleed onto the house. I try to not ever go over time, but I might have to go over time just a little bit. Also, I forgot to mention, I've been doing this after every class lately. I'm doing a live Q&A on Instagram after the class ends. So if anybody wants to join me over there, I maybe am not going to have time to peel off the tape, but I will maybe do that on Instagram live after. Is you don't want to peel off your tape while things are too wet. Sometimes that can make the paper itself rip apart. So if you're anxious to see what things look like on yours when the tape comes off, just make sure your paper is totally dry. And I thought maybe I could do it, but now I'm looking at the clock and I don't know that I'll be able to. But let me see. Maybe we can go over just a little bit of time here. I'm going to go ahead and move to the table real quick and just fill in everything. So I'm using the same colors on the fence and the table. So that ivory color in the middle, I'm going to do a little bit of light brown around the edge. I'm just going to fill in a lot of the fence with my light brown and then my dark brown. And again, you can, if you want a different dimension to any of this, you can go back in with your pen and add more pen on top of it when it's dry. It's a race against the clock now, guys. Oh dear. Things are still so wet right there. Okay, what else do I need? I'll do a little bit of black in my windows with the black watercolor pencil. And do the roof. You could use gray here or black or your pen. I'm going to fill in that fence area. this dark area with my black watercolor pencil. I'm gonna blend right here. Hopefully I'm still going to be able to add some of that white gel pen. I'll at least be able to do it in the sky and maybe parts of the grass or if not, I'll just use my other example to show you how you can add that when everything is dry. Might have to be like a cooking show here at the end and just switch back to my other example. Okay, I wanted a little bit more of a shadow under the bench and a little bit on the fence and at the bottom of the house. And I wanted that ivory color on the bench. Okay, so I'm just gonna clean my paintbrush a lot and blend all those things that I added. I'm gonna use this little flat brush and go ahead and blend my gray and blue on the house. I'm going to clean my brush before I blend the lighter areas. I'm just bouncing around to everywhere that's mostly dark on the house. I'm going to go ahead and blend all these darker areas while my paintbrush has some darker colors on it. So inside of the windows. And all of these little moments where it's just kind of messy around the edges, I can easily clean that up when this is dry with a pen or with the direct watercolor. Or you could use, like somebody mentioned, using the watercolor paint as well, and a fine point brush to clean up any edges. Oops. I didn't want green on the fence. Okay. And then I'll clean my brush or use a different brush to blend those lighter areas of the house again and let those all bleed together. My fence line. Oh, it is 7 o'clock, you guys. Okay, let me switch to my other completed piece and just show you how to add that gel pen. So once everything is totally dry and you've gone back in and added some details with the black, I realized I never even put in those tiki torches, but I actually put those in at the very end when everything was dry on this one. A lot of these pen details were added when everything was totally dry. So then I just took my white gel pen and went around and created a lot of nice little focused dots for those stars. I circled around. I also added some black pen kind of up to the edge of the bulbs of light, so that they kind of went over the areas where it glowed. You can see how I did that there. And yeah, and then adding the white gel pen, I did it in like some accent moments right here. Just gonna scribble a little bit to get it going. And I also, to create this glow around the gel pen, what I did was I did the gel pen. I'll do one right here. So I did the gel pen and then I touched it with my paintbrush, with a wet paintbrush, to make it kind of bleed. And so see how that little moment where I just put that, it kind of made a blurry glow effect. And then if I wait until that's dry and do a little prick of white gel pen on top of that, then it should really glow. So that's a nice little trick there for you. But again, that has to be done when it's totally dry. And I realized how ambitious it was of me to think that all of these layers would be dry by the end of class. And I could do that, but I can still demonstrate them here. So let's see if I can peel off the tape real quick. If it's not too wet, and we can get a little bit of a reveal happening in the class. Oh yeah, that looks great. Okay, so, oh, it was a little too wet right there. So there's a good demo of if you peel it before it's totally dry, it will kind of rip the paper right there. So you really want to make sure. Oh, it did it again. Oh, geez. Good example of what not to do. Sometimes that's the best thing to do as a teacher, is show all the people who are wanting to rip off their tape too fast why it's good to wait. If I go really slowly right there, it shouldn't happen though. Oh, it still happened. Oh, it's all right. It still looks really nice, but it would be better if we let it dry completely before we did that. But that gives it a nice little clean, you know, like it's frameable. So there we have it. Does anybody want to show their completed pieces real quick before we say goodnight? Even though we're in overtime here a little bit. Oh, look at that. That's lovely. And yeah, if anybody wants to join me on Instagram Live here in just a moment, I'll keep the discussion going if you have any questions about this process from tonight. Oh, look at that, Arthur. I love it. Very nice. Very nice, Maria. And the perspective on your fence, it's really strong. Lynette, really lovely. Oh, I love how much depth you got in the foreground. It's really convincing me, that depth of space. Barbara, thank you. All right, well, thank you guys so much. And yeah, if you just go to my Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art, I will start a live session and answer any remaining questions. And for those of you watching the YouTube version of this later, that live Q&A will be posted on my Instagram as well. So if you want to go check that out and see the Q&A later, it will still be there under my IGTV tab on Instagram. All right, thank you guys so much and have a great evening.
Thanks, Adrienne. Bye.
Thanks, Kelly. Good night.
Good night.